Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman. This little guy is my buddy, the Child, or is he the Child? We will get there, don't you worry. But we want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit-Down, and back in for, yes, obviously, another Mandalorian edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit-Down. We got the newest episode today, Black Friday, although I prefer to call this Mando Friday, because every Friday morning we get the Mandalorian at 3 a.m. And you might notice that it's much brighter in here than when I did my non-spoiler review, which if you haven't checked out, you want to check that out first. You can see it right up there. I highly suggest watching that if you haven't watched the episode, and then watch the episode and come back here for the spoiler stuff. You would have noticed it's usually much darker. I usually just have my set light on. Here I've got the natural light coming in because it's now 10 o'clock in the morning and the sun's fully up. I watched this episode 3 times. I watched it once and then went into the non-spoiler, and it took like 7-8 goes till I finally got like a take that I liked. I kept going on these tangents and spoilers. This episode is Ahsoka heavy, and I kept going like down that rabbit hole more than I needed to because, hello, spoiler review, do it there. So after I finished that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to watch this a couple more times. So this is a big episode. This is an important episode, both for the Mandalorian story and both for the Star Wars universe and where we could be going. The things we get, they're great. But there's some real big things at play here, and I wanted to make sure I had all my ducks in a row. So let's not waste any more time, man. Why don't you pull up a chair, take a seat. We are getting ready to dive in, spoiler-filled, into The Mandalorian, Chapter 13, The Jedi. And like I said in my non-spoiler review, I love this episode. I'm a huge fan of this show. I say that every week. Everybody knows this, and this is one of the best episodes that they've put out. It might be my favorite, maybe because it's just fresh, maybe because, like I've said, I've watched it like 3 times now. But if you're looking for like that really good Star Wars content that feels wholeheartedly like what you grew up with, I think the appearance of Lightsaber just elevates this to a place where I was in love. Now, I will say this. Filoni does a good job of making sure that we're rooted in the fact that it's a Mandalorian episode. But it feels much more like an Ahsoka adventure than a Mando-specific adventure where he kind of gets caught up in someone else's stuff. And I think everybody understands that. I think everybody is totally okay with that because, like I said, Filoni does a good job throughout the episode to make sure we always come back to Mando and reaffirm that story, progress that story. We have some big progressions for that story. So big where you kind of go, you know what? I'm alright that we went to a cold open that had nothing to do with the Mandalorian. And it's the thing that I really dug about the episode is I think we all pinpointed this one as the episode Ahsoka would show up in, because if anybody was going to debut her in live action, it should be the guy who talks about her like it's his daughter, right? Like, Dave Filoni created this character, and not just the character, but created one of fans' most favorite characters if you watch the animated stuff. And it's a character that's so beloved, but not everybody knows. So, of course, that's the guy that should debut her. And obviously, Jon Favreau felt the same way. As the first episode he doesn't write. Dave Filoni writes and directs everything here. And he does it expertly, man. Like, I was talking to my one friend when they got up at a normal hour, not 4 o'clock in the morning. But I was talking to her, I was like, the thing I love about this episode is that, like, Filoni understood that he was introducing the character to a larger audience. Yes, fans of the character will be very, very happy with this episode. But people who don't know the character, like my mom, for instance. I got my mom into The Mandalorian. She's never watched any of the animated stuff. I sent her a 12-minute video on, who Ahsoka is. And it was told through, clips from the show. Not like somebody telling you who it is. And she was like, great, now I want to watch all the animated shows. So I was like, yeah. And that's what I think Filoni and Favreau want to do with it, as they incorporate these things. And the way they present Ahsoka to us in this episode, if you're not familiar with her, you can totally understand elements of it. You don't understand everything. Like when she says, I've seen what fear can do to a fully trained Jedi. The best of them. We all know that she's referring to Anakin Skywalker, her master. not everybody will know that, but you understand that, like, clearly she must have been beside, a Jedi that she's seen, like, things happen to, or just references to things that we know. But if you don't know it, you can totally absorb it, and it doesn't take you out of The Mandalorian. The other thing that I said I loved is the fact that I think we all pinpointed this episode. I think Filoni knew that. And he doesn't waste any time getting us to Ahsoka. Whereas Bo-Katan, when she showed up, more of, we didn't necessarily know she was going to show up in that episode. And she kind of shows up in the middle of the episode. We start with Ahsoka, and maybe not right away. We get like maybe 30 seconds to a minute of setup. But basically, Filoni brings us right into Corvus. And I love how he sets the planet, right? Like, we come down, it's a forest planet, that's all we've heard, but it's dark and gloomy, and it looks like a forest fire has just ripped through the forest that would have been on this planet. The trees are dark, and some are black, and some don't have branches, and none of them have leaves, and you don't see a lot of green. But the way that it's shot in the middle of this fog and mist, and you can see the architecture in the background. In my non-spoiler, I pointed out how I love that Filoni used Asian-inspired architecture here. And what's cool is, a lot of those kind of like rippling, shingled roofs that you see in a lot of Asian architecture. A lot of right angles, a lot of hard corners. Here, it's that kind of style, and then it's all rounded, which feels a lot more Star Warsy. And you get a perfect mix of something that feels natural, feels like it belongs in the world, but allows you to change things up and bring in other elements. Just another way to diversify what you're putting on screen. And the architecture is gorgeous. And I love that we kind of start with, hey, look, this is this kind of barren, almost wastelandy looking forest. And behind it is, this city and the city gates. And the gates were the first thing that popped. I was like, oh man, I feel like I'm in the middle of like a samurai movie or a video game. I'm currently in the process of playing Ghost of Tsushima, which is fantastic. But outside of it just being really thick concrete, which would be Star Wars related, the gate felt like it was right out of like a movie with a samurai. And the way it opens, there's a couple of shots where you get to see the gate open and stuff. And just so heavily influenced. But putting that Star Wars twist on it really made it feel authentic. But it allows you to play with a whole bunch of different things, including Ludwig Göransson, who comes in score-wise doing the Mando stuff, but kind of putting this Asian accent on it. Toward the end of the episode, you kick into the main I'm gonna stop that. The main theme, but instead of it being what we're used to hearing, it's all wind instruments. And it has this kind of Asian flair to it, where you're like, I love that mixture of culture into this world of Star Wars. And I just thought it was a really smart thing to do. And that setting and kind of some of the shots even Filoni has that kind of reminisce samurai movies, or even one shot that's kind of Mortal Kombat-esque. That setting is perfect for what goes on in the episode, and it allows Filoni to debut one of the most beloved characters from the animated series, and for people who have watched it, one of the most beloved characters in the Star Wars universe. A really excellent small screen debut. And the other thing that I love in this opening is after you kind of get that set, you're kind of looking from the Magistrate's point of view, who, she's kind of like the one that rules the town, so to speak, being played by Diana Lee Inosanto, who does an excellent job. But you're kind of seeing her perspective of what's going on, and all of a sudden you see like the soldiers and blasters shooting in this forest. And there's all this fog, so the visual is wonderful, but you also know like they're shooting at something. And before you can even really piece together that it's clearly not going to be the Mandalorian, because we didn't see him land. We almost always see him land, unless he's someplace that is familiar to us. Before you can even put that together that it's definitely not him and it's probably Ahsoka, she's just on screen. There's no, like, the lightsabers turn on. There's no, like, establishing shot that introduces her to us in a way where you're like, wow, take a look at that. No, it just throws you right in the middle of action that's already happening. And the first time you see her, she's flying from like this corner of the screen as she slashes through two dudes. And then you then get the full visual as she's kind of clearing out this like patch of like 6 or 7 guys maybe. and the action is phenomenal. I said in my non-spoiler that it's not peak Ahsoka action. You don't get like a crazy sequence where she is just going to town and she's flipping and doing all of the intricate acrobatic things that we know Ahsoka can do. And I actually think that's smart, because if you have Rosario Dawson and this either turns into a spin-off or she's in more episodes, it allows you to kind of keep in your back pocket that big wow moment for either something that's directly hers or just another moment where you want that pop to be big. You can show us Rosario Dawson kicking ass, looking and feeling like Ahsoka, and doing cool things without showing you your entire hand. And that's what you get here, and you get really cool moments. Like, he's like fighting a few of them, and she cuts through like one, and at the same time, like, she cuts this way, I guess, and she cuts through a tree, so you can see the burns through the tree, and then she force takes the middle part of the tree and throws it at another soldier. And I rewound that 5 times in a row. I was like, holy shit, wow. And then you see like the tree kind of sits and then falls over. But it was a gorgeous shot, and something that felt very much like something like that would be Ahsoka, like style-wise. The way she's twirling the lightsabers, just having 2 lightsabers in general already is a different kind of style and look. But the way that Ahsoka spins them specifically is very, very specific, and Rosario nails that stuff. And just seeing that, and then to give you the full idea of how powerful and in touch she is with the Force, like splitting that tree and then throwing the tree trunk to take out another guy, that was genius, and it just looked wonderful. And the other thing that I love about the whole sequence is, you know, the way that the Mandalorian kind of tread into the horror world. We saw that a couple times last year, and here you kind of get this horror type action sequence where you got like a group of people in a forest, and you know, while the trees aren't full, the mist kind of fills in those gaps so you can have stuff running around. And after you get that, like, boom, hey, here's Ahsoka, she drifts into that, I'm gonna disappear, I'm gonna get you over here, I'm gonna get you over here, I'm gonna come out, you're gonna see those lightsabers light up first, and then me come through the mist. Filoni gives you all the stuff that you want with that, but it kind of does have this like horror feel where it's like, shit, man, it is something scary out here. Even to the point where at one point, I don't think in the opening, it might have been later in the episode, but we literally get like an Ahsoka POV run up on somebody. And I love those elements because they fit in the world really, really well. And it plays into an action sequence that's just dope. I mean, there's a shot where you see her and she's lit up and the lightsabers go off, and as she's kind of dimming from that, the mist just kind of comes in, she disappears. Love that stuff. And the opening is just, it's a wow show. Like, you're just like, holy crow, like that's, and then boom, you know, you get, she clears all them, gets up, she talks to the magistrate, and is basically demanding information, which after watching multiple times and knowing what that information was, all of a sudden that moment you're like, oh shit, here we go, that's what she's going after. I didn't really piece that together the first time through. But basically the magistrate's like, I'm not gonna help you. Nothing you do is gonna change that. And she's like, all right, we'll see, you know, kind of bit, and that's boom, cold open, and you just kind of sit there going, wow, man, like what a way to start. And we haven't even seen our main characters. And of course, right after the cold open, we dive in with the Mando. And one of the things that I really love about this episode, and I didn't really piece together until I was watching this, and it's because Filoni has like a moment at the beginning, he has a moment in the middle, and he has a moment at the end where you really see these things. I love the way that Din has legitimately not just become a father to the child, but feels and looks and acts like a father. You get some real father-son moments in this episode. And when we first jump in, you hear Mando talking to him, like, and that's the other thing too. I like that he's talking more and more. Like, he was silent for so long, but now like he realizes that he has somebody that he can interact with, even if they don't necessarily fully communicate. They can understand each other enough where like Mando just talks and talks, like much like last episode. Like, he's got no one else to talk to, so I'm gonna talk to him. He's like, Corvus, I got a beacon. This is where we're at. And he looks at me. He's like, get back in your seat. He's kind of sitting up on the panel. And as he's saying that, he locks in on the little ball on knob on top of the gear shift, and he's looking at it. And Mando's just like, "What did I say to you?" And you're like, he's referencing the ball, but even if he's not, he's like, "What did I just say? Go get in your seat." And you're like, "Oh man!" Like, he's not mean or angry, but just that kind of stern, like when your kid is messing around in the car and you're like the dad, it's like, hey, sit down. Like he just is like, what did I tell you? Like, get in the back, sit down. I love these interactions between them. But the fact of the matter is, like, you really get it when you get down to the ground. There's so much cuteness. The way he moves too, I just love everything about this little guy. But when they get on the ground, that's where you really see these interactions, because Din has to carry him everywhere. And while sometimes he will put him in that kind of side saddle pouch he has, he carries him a bunch. And just the way he interacts with him, there's a shot where he's holding him like this and he looks down before he looks back up at Ahsoka. And I'm just like, God, that father-son vibe is so much stronger than it was before. And it's because the pod is gone. Like, when the pod got destroyed, you're like, oh no, the pod. Not knowing that it was going to give us all these really physical interactions that are so loving and father-son oriented, that it really elevates that whole feeling between the two characters. And anytime, whether he's, doing stuff with him at the end, anytime he's picking up or taking him places, and the way that he talks to him, like, you really get the sense of this relationship and how important it is. And that is a genius move by Filoni specifically to do that in this episode, because of where we get by the end. And even though it's a spoiler review, I'm not going to spoil the end until we get there, because we run through the whole episode. You know how this goes. But having all those elements in there, really, really smart when you start to think about what's going on, especially from the storytelling perspective. And I just love watching those interactions. The other thing that I love is watching the Mandalorian get someplace new. Anytime he gets someplace new, you get to see the area around where he lands, and then he walks through the middle of town. And he comes up to this gate, and immediately he's stopped by Michael Biehn, I believe. His character doesn't have a name, but he's basically the Magistrate's like right-hand man, like the head of her, military or, guards and whatnot. He's like, what's your business here? And Mando's so smart, man. He's just like, oh, man, I've been tracking for days. I'm just looking for a place to, like, chill for a minute. And he look, Mandalorians are very specific looking in their armor. So he's like, a hunter, I take it. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I like that armor. And there's, like, a real interest in the armor. And again, this is something that, like, Filoni sets up before you get the reveal. And then when you go back and you rewatch, you're like, oh man, like him being so interested in the armor makes sense, because the Magistrate has this Beskar steel staff, which means they've probably run into Mandalorians before. And there is this kind of evil look in Bien's eyes where he's like that armor you got on. But nevertheless, he convinces, he's like, Guild, he's like, last I checked, like, I am what you think I am. I'm just trying to take a load off. Can I come into your city? And he's like, fine, open the gates, and he comes in. And you get one of these bits where you see him walk through town. And this is where we really get to see some of the architecture, specifically the Magistrate's like castle, palace, whatever it is. Just this really, really gorgeous looking stuff, even though it's in this dark kind of setting. And as he's walking through, Mando's just acting like this is normal. Like, he doesn't know that Ahsoka is at odds with the Magistrate, or that there is a Magistrate. And he like goes up to, like, you see like a little woman like selling some stuff, and he's like, merchant or something like that. And the other thing too that I love, specifically with the Mando's relationship with the child, is how much more now that he's like interacting with him, more he's just cooing and cawing and doing all these sounds all the time. Like, the camera's not even on him. Like, he's in a little pouch and he's kind of covered by the Mandalorian's cape. And you hear, like, these noises. I was like, is that coming from outside? And every time, same noise. Like, it's definitely coming from the show. And it's him just, like, making noises and reacting to things in the world. Like, when he talks to the merchant, like, you hear him say something at the end. And you're like, I just like seeing this growth in this little guy. It's so adorable. But, he goes to talk to the merchant. The merchant runs off. And, he's just trying to get information. He's trying to say, like, hey, has anybody seen a Jedi? And he sees a man with two kids in an alleyway. And he approaches him. And he's like, excuse me, I'm looking for... The man's like, please, don't talk to them or anybody here. And as he's about to say, like, because it'll mean some sort of bad things, these droids show up right behind him, and you see the guy kind of, and they're just like, come with us, the Magistrate wants to see you. So Mandalorian goes to see the Magistrate. And that's one of those gate opening shots that blew my mind, because you open it into like a outdoor garden before you get to like the main part of whatever this palace is, and the Magistrate is out, and you have this long plank and then water on both sides, Then all this green, everything's been gray and dead looking, and you get all this green and foliage, and it's all, trees and things that you would find in different parts of Asia, and the whole feeling, it kind of felt like a koi pond, even though they weren't koi fish. But as it opens and you reveal to that, like, breathtaking shot, I was just like, oh man, and that was the first time I was like, this really feels like I'm in the middle of a samurai movie. And he kind of approaches, and same thing, she kind of is like, you're a Mandalorian or whatever. She's like, so might want to take a look at your might be interested in an offer I have. And Mandalorian is immediately like, lady, my price is really high, like I'm just here to look for something, like what is it? And she's like, what he doesn't know is that she's at odds with this Jedi, and she basically tries to hire the Mandalorian to go kill the Jedi. And when Mando starts to realize that that's what's going on, he kind of shifts gears into like, all right, yeah, maybe my price is really high. What are you gonna pay me with? And as that's happening, she's feeding the fish, and you get a shot of the fish. You see a couple of them swim through the water, and then you get a shot of Baby Yoda's eyes. And the child did the same thing in the Razor Crest when he spotted the ball. There's just a slight raise in his eyes. It's very small, but it's like, ooh. And as soon as he saw the fish, it's like, this kid loves seafood, apparently. But anyway, the magistrate kind of is like, well, I got this. And she's like, here, check this out. And this is another one of those things that Filoni does where, like, Mando gets this really long metal staff, and he bangs it on his Beskar, and it makes a very specific metallic clang. And he immediately is like, this is Beskar. And, Magistrate's like 100% pure. And rather than asking, like, where'd you get this from or anything like that, she's like, I know that this is important to you. I'll give you this staff. Does that reach your price if you go track down this Jedi? And the Mandalorian already knows he's not going to kill Ahsoka because he's looking for her. But this could help him in finding. And sure enough, the Magistrate gives him actual coordinates, like full-blown coordinates to where she is. And Mando takes off and goes, and he's walking through the forest, and you get, okay, these are the coordinates. I don't see anything. You're just kind of like in the middle of the forest. There's a little bit of a clearing. You see a couple creatures. Sometimes you just see like a bunch of different creatures in the background. So at one point we see a loth cat, which, again, genius move from Mr. Dave Filoni, because a white loth cat belonged to Ezra, and that ties into Ahsoka's story. So to see a loth cat show up, I thought was pretty cool. But we see a loth cat. We see these giant creatures in the back that are kind of just like eating the tree branches, and they're real slow. They almost look like AT-ATs, but they're like long legs and this big hump of a creature. They're just kind of eating the background. And you see him come up, and he's like, I'm looking around. I don't see any threats. And then he hears a noise. And really strange maneuver. Like, you hear something that you think might be dangerous. And he takes the child out, puts him on a rock, and goes, don't worry, little guy. Like, you chill here. I'll check out what's going on. And then he just whips out like a telescope. Like a little mini telescope. Like, you could have kept it in the bag for that. But he looks around and he sees the creatures. He goes, oh, false alarm, no big deal. And zoom, you hear lightsabers come on, and obviously the Mandalorian, familiar to those types of sounds, as soon as the sound starts, and it's the stuff that I love about this show. Like, his movement is almost instantaneous to the zoom, like this, as the sound hits. Like, it happens so fast. It's literally, as that sound is starting, he's turning to block Ahsoka coming down with the two. And when I said it was genius that Filoni did that thing with the Beskar staff and like the metallic clang, because when Ahsoka comes down, we're very used to what it sounds like when a lightsaber hits a lightsaber, or even a lightsaber just hitting or cutting through metal. We're familiar with those sounds. Doing that thing with the Beskar presented a very specific sound. So when it clashes with the lightsaber, you get an even more specific sound. And the sound is dope. And it's like Filoni wants you to hear that sound, because they sit, like, he blocks and you get that look of like the two lightsabers, and like they're on for a while. And even later on in the episode, there's something similar where like they hold and you can hear this sound, and I'm gonna just say it's beautiful. It really popped. I was like, that's so cool. Like, to take, I never thought of like a lightsaber fighting like sword style, something other than a lightsaber. Like, what would be strong enough to stop it? And Beskar steel apparently is. And that sound was just cool. But you get them fighting, and you get this really, really freaking awesome moment where Ahsoka is fighting, and she comes, and as she does, Mando shoots his flamethrower to try to stop her. It catches her cloak that she has and kind of starts to burn it, and as it starts to catch fire, she releases it and lands, so she's just in, like, no more cloak, just full-on Ahsoka. And as she does that, the Mando shoots out his thing and wraps it around her, and she's like this. And then she looks at him, she looks up and sees a tree branch, and she smiles. And in my non-spoiler, I mentioned that Rosario's facial expressions and the acting that she was doing in her face was so good, and it really made you feel like she was Ahsoka. She has these little smirks when she knows something that you don't, and that's one of them. She sees that, she gets this little tiny smirk on her face, and then she flips up over the branch and then comes down and basically is pulling Mando up. And just as quick as she's thinking, Mando's the same way. He cuts his thing, he drops down, she pulls out the... and he gets his blaster out, and he's like, Ahsoka Tano! And she stops. And he's even got, like, one hand out like this, and he's just like, Bo-Katan sent me to find you. I need your help. And lightsabers come back in, and she goes, or he's like, I have to talk to you about something. And she, like, the lightsabers come in, and she goes, I really hope we can talk about what's over there, because that looks real interesting. And you're like, that's how I feel, because obviously Ahsoka knew Yoda. Yoda's the only person we've ever seen from this species. And she's like, I'm very intrigued at what's going on over here. And we jump right to night, so it's nice. We don't have to have Mando tell this whole story to Ahsoka. Clearly they do. And then when we jump to night, she's communing with the child. And I love, like, a nervous dad, man. He's like, he knows he has to do this, had to get the child to Ahsoka, figures he can trust Ahsoka because she was a Jedi. And simultaneously, he's like, I can't take my eyes off this kid, and it's just pacing back and forth, like, when is it going to end? And we cut in on Rosario and the child, and again, the facial work from Rosario Dawson in this episode is fantastic, man. Her facial expressions. They're having a full-blown, what seems like a conversation as they start to kind of share each other's memories, through the Force. And they're kind of responding to each other, with their thoughts, and you see them reacting almost like they're talking, but they're not. And the way she responds to things with her face, and even the way the baby responds to things with the way that he moves. Like, you can tell that they must be having some sort of communication, and when it's done, like, that's the first thing Mando says to Ahsoka. He's like, can you communicate with him? And, she explains how it works, and I love this. Like, especially through this stretch, we get a lot of information. But some of the information is just like general Star Wars knowledge, and Ahsoka drops it on the Mandalorian because he probably doesn't know. And while us, the audience, or most of us, the audience, knows some of these things, there's a new crop, a new generation of Star Wars fans who might not know this stuff. So you're finding ways to give us lore without beating it over the heads of people who know it already, but can introduce new people to more of the universe if they haven't, explored all of it. And I love how Filoni does that. And, while she's, kind of explaining how communication is working between them, she just says his name. She just goes, Grogu. And I stopped the show. I was like, back that up. Did she just say? And then I didn't even need to do that because Mandalorian does it for us. He goes, Grogu? And she's like, yeah. And Rosario delivers it so matter of fact. She's like, yeah, it's his name. And we're all sitting there like, well, finally, somebody was able to figure it out. And every time the Mandalorian says Grogu, or even, I guess, when Ahsoka says it, the child responds with this, like, sound. And the name is kind of jarring at first, but as you watch it, it gets used a bunch throughout the episode. And like I said, the way he responds is so freaking adorable that it started to grow on me. And then the fact that we know that, like, there's light and there's dark, and if you're not trained one or the other, you're kind of in the middle. The child could go either way. I mean, we've talked about it with the eggs when people freaked out. It's like, well, maybe he's a little evil. We don't know, because he can tap into the Force, so he can tap into the light and the dark. And we don't know anything about where he comes from or any of these things. So to kind of have a name that could be good or bad also kind of grew on me. And, in talking about not knowing anything about his past, Ahsoka reveals it to us. And we find out a bunch of things. Like, we find out that he grew up on Coruscant and was trained there by a bunch of different Jedi, and was in the Jedi Temple when Order 66 went down, and was hidden away. Someone took him out of the temple and hid him. and kind of locked him away. And she's like, after that, his memories get dark. And as soon as she said his memories get dark, I was like, dark like you can't see, or dark because it's confusing and dark side stuff? What are you telling me here? So it's like, it gets kind of dark, and it's obvious that he had to hide his powers to protect himself. So in not using the Force, like, is that could fade. Or she kind of mentions that, and the Mandalorian's like his powers, and she's like, well, the Force gives him the ability to have powers, and then explains the Force, how it's in all living things. And again, like, these little things for a new audience to understand if you don't know already. I mean, there are probably some people, kids most likely, watching The Mandalorian as their introduction to Star Wars. So I love the way that he slips those in there. But as soon as the Mandalorian's like, oh, you mean his powers? She's like, well, but he's exhibited powers, and you find out that, like, they could have faded away. And she's interested in how strong he is. And they're just kind of going, and Mando kind of explains, like, look, my job was to bring this kid to one of his own. I had to get him to a Jedi so they could, like, teach him or whatever. Like, you gotta help me out here. And Ahsoka, as soon as the Order is meant, like, they bring up the Jedi Order, like, she's like, the Jedi Order fell a long time ago, and there's, like, she almost winces when she says the word Order, and it's like there's a pain or a disdain in her reaction as she is saying it or hearing it. But when it's the actual word, like when she says Order, she kind of winces. And, like, just a brilliant little piece of nuanced acting that plays into that character, right? Like, for those unaware, in the animated series, in Clone Wars, Ahsoka is framed for a crime, and the Jedi Order pretty much assumes she's guilty right away. And the only person who doesn't is Anakin, and by the time the truth comes out, too much damage has been done, and Ahsoka's like, I'm out. I'm just leaving. So she left the Jedi Order because they kind of betrayed her. So to see Rosario react that way, again, was something else that pulled me in, where I was like, this really is Ahsoka on screen right now. Like, the way Bo-Katan popped and felt so legitimate in coming to life, being done by the woman who voices her, in Katie Sackhoff. You sit here and you're like, we sure that Rosario wasn't like Ahsoka's whole... Like, she really grasped the character. And just the way she says that, it was something that popped to me. But she was like, the Jedi Order fell a long time ago. And Mando just responds, in a way that I was like, that is my freaking dude, And he's like, well, so did the Empire, and yet they're still chasing him, like, hunting him. You have to help us. Like, he needs your help. And Rosario's finally like, all right, so, like, let him sleep for the night, and in the morning, I'll test him. And we get to the morning, and this is where, like, those Dagobah vibes really pop for me, because all of a sudden in daylight, there's a bunch of green moss and stuff on some of the rocks and the trees, and you're like, oh, it had this kind of more swampy feel to it. And then you have, like, Ahsoka, a Jedi Master, testing a young Padawan, so to speak. And you kind of get that Yoda-Luke vibe, and just what she's doing with the testing. And I love that that's the feel that you get around that. And just, like, in the visual storytelling, you can kind of get the feeling of something else. And I also love, again, the way Din interacts with the child, and you get to see him again, like, pick him up, put him down, like, treat him like it's his own. And then, Ahsoka does this thing where she takes a rock and she force pushes it to him, and the child gets all excited. He's like, ooh, and he grabs it. And then she's like, okay, Grogu, like, send it back to me. And he's just kind of cooing and looking, and he literally looks at the Mandalorian. The Mandalorian's like, go ahead. Like, he does, like, a head nod thing. He does it several times in the scene. Almost any time they ask him to do something, like, the child looks for the approval first. And when he's like, go for it, he just drops it. And Mando, I love this. Mando's like, he's pretty stubborn. Like, this doesn't shock me. And she's like, come here. And Mando says something like, well, he's not going to come. Like, I'll go get him. She's like, no, not him. You come here. And he's like, what do you mean me? She's like, I feel a very strong connection between the two of you. I want to see if he responds. So Mando's like, all right. So he takes the rock, and he's like, and I love the way that he talks to him. It's like he's talking to a kid who you're trying to teach catch for the first time so you can play catch with him. And literally, to a degree, that's what's going on. And he's like, come on, man. Like, take it. Like, take it out of my hand. And nothing happens. And, the Mandalorian's like, told you, man, he's kind of stubborn. And she goes, well, try to connect with him. You know, like some sort of shared connection might spur something. And again, the way the camera can shoot the Mandalorian and the way the body language can express things, you could literally, like, you know, like when an idea goes off and your eyes go wide, you literally see the Mandalorian as he's thinking. His eyes, like, go wide even though they're behind that mask. And it's like third, fourth time, like, I've seen that type of a moment where it's like, I feel like he has eyes, but he doesn't. And just the way that he presents is like, oh, and you're like, he's got the freaking little ball. And he takes it out and he's like, hey, look at this. And, you know, the child immediately locks eyes. Like, you want this? Come on, take it. And he's like, you know, and like encouraging Mom. He's like, come on, you can do it. Like, just take it out of my hand. And you see him close his eyes and he puts his little hand out and ball flies right to it. And Mando gets so excited. It was awesome. It was like a proud dad seeing his kid do something for the first time. He's trying to teach him. He's like, yeah, you did. Like, I knew you could do it. And I'm like, so, like, oh man, like, just unbelievable. Like, oh, I was so happy. And he's like, look at that, man. Like, he did it. He's like, so can you help us? And she walks over and she's like talking to him. She's like, I sense much fear in you. And Mando's like, look, man, like, you did it. Like, let's go. Let's start training or stuff like that. Like, that's what my mission was. Now we're here. And she's like, I can't train him. And Mando's like, what do you mean you can't train him? She's like, the connection that he has with you makes him vulnerable for fear. And then, like, you know, anger. And Mando's like, I don't understand what you mean. She's like, I've seen what fear does to a fully trained Jedi. Like, the best of us. And you're just sitting there and you're like, oh my god, dude, like hardcore, like talking right to the Mandalorian without him knowing. Talking about Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. And the minute she had said, like, I sense a lot of fear in you, I was like, that's not good. And she basically explained, she's like, look, if fear can sink in to a fully trained Jedi and he can go bad, I'm not going to set a child on that same path. Like, I've seen it happen. I won't do it again. You're better off just letting his powers fade. Mandalorian, again, is just like, you can't, you know, you can't. Like, I need you to help me train him. And she's just like, no, you know, I got to go back to town. And Mando's immediately like, Magistrate hired me to murder you. And Ahsoka stops, and he's like, I'll help you liberate this town, but I need you to help train, you know, Grogu. And we just kind of wipe right to the next bit of action. So you're figuring they probably have come to an agreement. And, you know, they walk to town, and as they're walking, another one of these wonderful moments. There's so many wonderful moments between these two throughout the episode. But, like, Mando's just breaking down the artillery that he saw when he was in there. He's like, they've got this, man, they've got, like, these guns, they've got this. And he's like, you and your two laser swords can't match that. And Rosario just smiles and kind of chuckles to herself, like, huh, if you knew the things that I've done in my life, you would not be telling me that amount of arsenal I can't stop. And it's just like these little moments are just so wonderful. And then, you know, she kind of gives more of a background on the Magistrate. We find out that her name was Morgan Elsbeth. And, you know, she lost all of her people and drove her basically to a place to hop on board with the Empire. And, like, she helped basically build the Imperial Starfleet. And she, like, has destroyed worlds. Like, she is not a good person. You know, she's like, so what are we going to do? And Mandalorian just goes, a Mandalorian and a Jedi? Like, we're going to work together? This is kind of crazy. But he doesn't go there. He goes, they'll never see it coming. And we jump back to the top of that, you know, the gate. And again, we're kind of up there with a bunch of these droids and soldiers. And they're kind of looking out, waiting. Because, you know, Magistrate obviously knows Ahsoka's going to come back at some point. And sure enough, you see her. It is another one of these wonderful things where you see her start to move through the distance of the fog, and all of these droids respond like, that's her, like sound the alarm or whatever, and they start banging the giant bell gong thing, and like you see her coming, she disappears because she's smaller than the wall, and then you just see her coming up and over, just starting to frickin' go to town. And again, you get one of these like really awesome Ahsoka moments where like she's fighting like multiple of these things. She gets the one pin, she uses the Force to throw the gun at the other one, hits him in the head, and knocks him out. Oh, it was awesome. But then she kind of finishes off the one that she's fighting, and there's one other, and they cut to behind where you see like this giant bell, and then you see pieces of her, and you just see the lightsabers come this way, and cut whatever was in half in front of her, the last like android, but also cuts the bell in half, clean in half, and you see it doom doom fall down. Such a cool shot, man. Like I was sitting there, I was like, oh, that was freaking awesome. And you get to a spot where after she clears out everybody, she goes down, and the Magistrate is outside of her like little palace gate, and I think she's talking to Michael Biehn's character, and all of a sudden you just get the shot of Ahsoka. She's in the distance and is just standing by herself, and she is like down here on the screen, and then the rest of the screen is just the background and some of that smoky fog, and it's just this gorgeous shot, and a shot reminiscent of like a Western showdown to a degree. Like you're gonna have two people stand toe to toe, and you kind of get that perspective of like, hey, I'll wait from back here and then flip it around. And again, just these little elements that work their way into these episodes that I just get giddy about. And they basically, I think they talk back and forth again. She's like, I need that information, and Magistrate is not gonna give it to you. And they send people after her, and she takes off, and she just goes kind of like running through the town. Again, we get one of these shots. She tells Biehn, I'm gonna go inside, go find her. And like as they're kind of going through the town, you get another one of these kind of, we're walking through, we're seeing the alleys. We see that Loth Cat pop back up again. It might have been the only time, but he pops up twice where you really see me like, that's a Loth Cat. But as they're kind of going through, you get Ahsoka showing up again, shoom, 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 taking people out. You get, I think it's in this scene, you get a shot of these two droids standing here, and it literally creates this perfect little window, and it's dark, and you just see the light come on, and you get that shot that we've seen in the animated series of Ahsoka pulling this way, revealing the lightsaber, and then it turning into the two. But from behind the droids, it was gorgeous. Like, I'm telling you, Filoni sets up some really, really, really wonderfully cinematic moments throughout this whole freaking episode that multiple times really put Ahsoka on display. And that shot of her like going like this, and she starts kind of taking these guys out, I think in the streets or whatever. She's disappearing. Mando comes dropping in his jetpack, starts kicking, blasting people, and the next thing you know, like everything gets cleared out. Michael Biehn's character and one other droid are like MIA, and you see this droid when they're going hop up on the roof. Again, really cool shot. Like he hops, and because he's a droid, literally flips over his wrists and lands on his feet on top of the roof. I was like, that's cool, man. But everybody else gets taken out, and Ahsoka disappears. As Biehn comes back to where she was basically standing toward the front of this street, Mando's already dropped in and done his thing. He's on one side, he's on the other, and you see Ahsoka up on the ledge of the gate leading into like the little palace area. And you see Biehn see her, she jumps down, and end up basically with a showdown, standoff between Michael Biehn's character and the Mandalorian, and Ahsoka and the Magistrate in different locations. And what's cool is this is one of those things that Filoni does that kind of regrounds us in the fact that this is the Mandalorian show, because while there's dope action going on with Ahsoka, we cut away from that sometimes. And we can hear it because we've gotten used to hearing, that sound, that very specific sound of lightsaber on Beskar. And obviously the Magistrate is fighting with that Beskar staff. So you can hear things going on the outside, but the Mandalorian's perspective is important, specifically if he's in the same place, even if it's a different location, same overall place. It's important to cut back to his perspective and keep us grounded there. And the other thing, too, is, and we've seen this a bunch of times in the show, where things happen off screen, like that little guy shoots off, and instead of seeing him spin all over the air, you're getting that in your brain, you just see him land. Anytime we cut away, because we're hearing it, and the way the sounds are, you can kind of tell the way the fight's going, so it doesn't feel like you're missing too much, and you're able to get the Mandalorian's perspective. And as they're kind of cutting back and forth, Bien's trying to like disarm, the Mando with words, and he's like, "Who do you think's winning there? Like my side or your side right now?" And Mando's just stone cold, nothing. You cut back, you see some action. You cut back to Bien. He's like, "You and me, we're not too different. Like we both, stand for a cause, and we're willing to put our lives down for the right reasons. That's not this. Like this reason isn't the reason for the two of us to kill each other." And he doesn't say that, but that's what he's saying, implying with the like, not this. This isn't the one. And you cut back in, you see some more fight. You cut back out, and he goes, "Sounds like you win." And he's basically like, "I'm just put this down. Sounds like you guys won." And Mando's standing with his hand like right by the trigger. And as, Bien's character is putting it on the ground, he kind of relaxes and straightens out his wrist. And the whole time Bien's doing this real slow, you're like, this mother effer is gonna try to shoot him after he puts the gun down. And the minute Mando like relaxes his hand, the smile on Bien, and he pulls for his back heel for another blaster. And Mando obviously knows this is coming. Shoots him real quick. And you're just like, oh, that was awesome. And the older man that we saw Mando talking to earlier with the kids has been watching this whole time. And he sees that, and he kind of slowly comes out. And, there's basically like this, "Hey, man, no problem, man. I got you covered." And all of a sudden, he's just like, "Look behind you." And that droid that was still out there, the one that flipped up on the roofs, starts to come over the roof. And again, Mando just so fast, right through the head of the bot. Android falls to the ground. And, that's kind of how the scene ends. On the inside, what's going on as we're cutting back and forth is this dope fight between Ahsoka and the Magistrate. And this is that shot where you're kind of low. This is really gorgeous, kind of, again, standoff type of shot, but also like Mortal Kombat-esque to a degree. Like the way the two are standing, there's water right in front of you. It felt like a shot out of a area to fight in Mortal Kombat. But, these two are gonna throw down. And, you get like them set, and when they're going, man, it's great. And again, you're getting that lightsaber on Beskar steel, and these hard movements with some of these fast ones, and they're just going back and forth. And like I said, that sound, it's so distinct that anytime we cut out and we hear it, we're picturing what's going on in our minds because of what the sound is telling us. And that's that part of that visual storytelling that Filoni's just crushed this whole episode. That you don't really feel, because at first you're like, no, I want to go with we're missing things. I want to see more. But by the time that scene ends, you feel super fulfilled because all the things that you need to see, the things that you want to happen, you get to watch. And you basically get to a point where Ahsoka is hitting the crap out of this Beskar steel and finally splits it into a couple pieces and knocks it clean out of the Magistrate's hand and comes up on her. And he's like, "Now are you going to tell me where Grand Admiral Thrawn is?" I lost my mind! I lost my mind. I was like, did they just drop Thrawn into the Mandalorian? Now, I'm sure there are a bunch of you at home going, Thrawn? I don't even know everything there is to know about the character of Thrawn, other than his appearances in Rebels. He is a huge thorn in the side to Ezra and Sabine, which also ties in Ahsoka. And he is a Grand Admiral. And like one of the smartest minds, like in the Imperial world. Like he is like Sherlock Holmes if he went bad, so kind of like Moriarty, I guess. But he can break things down the way Sherlock Holmes does. But instead of using it to solve crimes, he uses it to his own advantage to ascend himself in the ranks of the Imperials, and always just kind of used to his advantage. But he is a mastermind. And the last time we saw Ezra, he was on Thrawn's ship, which means that Ahsoka, who was in the world between worlds, I'm not going to get into all this now. You should watch Clone Wars and Rebels. But she's kind of in this other area, and that kind of takes place over the course of the original trilogy. So the reason that she's not anywhere to be seen, because she literally is not anywhere to be seen. But by the time, she would come back, finding out that Ezra is with Thrawn somewhere, that's probably why she's looking for Thrawn. She's trying to track down Ezra. And if you're trying to track down Ezra, that means that Sabine is going to be involved somewhere, and that means that you could be building to a spot where we get to see Ezra, Sabine, and Thrawn all in The Mandalorian, or you get to a spin-off on Ahsoka. That could be the Ahsoka storyline. Very much like you could spin off Bo-Katan with the Darksaber and Gideon. You could spin off the Ahsoka show and have her main thing be, I'm trying to track down Thrawn because he's got Ezra. And I know I'm probably saying lots of things that some of you don't understand or really know. Maybe I'll do a breakdown of everything that we could be building towards. But again, just more evidence to the fact that Filoni has lots of toys that have never been played with in the live action, and Favreau is all about working them into the story and weaving them into this fabric where these are the we're gonna start cherry picking folks from the animated series. We could have a whole universe of live action shows just coming out of that stuff, and that's super exciting because there are really awesome stories that you could be telling coming out of those time periods before The Mandalorian. And again, is a really smart way to try to get people to go into the animated show. I mean, I showed my mom that 12-minute clip on Ahsoka, and she was like, well, now I want to watch the whole animated series. And these things are things that should fire up and get the fan base excited, and hopefully that brings new people in. But when she said Thrawn, my head exploded, and I was like, like, that's so freaking genius, Dave Filoni. But basically, that we assume that she's going to tell or give her some kind of information, because we get another one of these wipes. We've seen the wipes throughout this show. When Filoni gets his hands on it, man, they come back, man. He's like, hey, guys, don't forget how Star Wars used to be. And I love them because they're familiar. But you kind of get, all of that stuff in that, moment. And then we jump, back outside, and the townsfolk are coming out, and they're rejoicing. And I'd said in my non-spoiler that I love the fact that Filoni had, extras that were Asian. That you could insert into this world that was very obviously inspired by, a lot of different areas of the Asian culture. Not everybody in town is Asian, but the ones that we're with, whether it's the Magistrate, this guy and his two kids, and a bunch of the faces that we do see are Asian, but it's this nice mix of people anyway. Just want to clarify that there is a mixture of people, specifically at the end of the show, and they're all celebrating. What's cool is they got these banners, and they're putting on clothes and stuff that have green all over them. I'm like, I wonder if this forest planet used to be green. It probably was. And they're all excited, and that older dude gets the cloak put on, assuming he's now the magistrate of that town. It's all good things going on. You're love a good celebration, and outside, Mando and Ahsoka are just kind of chit-chatting, and you get this wonderful moment where Ahsoka's like, here you go. And he's like, I don't deserve this. I didn't fulfill my job. I didn't kill you. She's like, yeah, but this belongs with the Mandalorian. And it's one of those things where, obviously, Ahsoka, knowing Bo-Katan and her group, knows that, the ability to work with the Mandalorian is there. They're not all bad, but still, Jedi and Mandalorian typically at odds with each other. So you get this kind of peace moment where she's like, here's this, and Mando grabs it at the same time and kind of takes it. And you're like, that was just a really sweet moment or whatever. And then she's like, where's the child? He's like, oh, he's safe on the ship. He's like, I'll go get him. And you get this almost heartbreaking moment where Mando goes back to the ship, and he kind of goes in to get the child, and the child is asleep in his little hammock thing. And I should watch these multiple times before I do these spoilers, because watching it the third time, maybe the second time, all of a sudden I started to notice that the score that's going on there is all this wind instruments, like flutes and types of things going on. It fits, what Ludwig's been doing with the score the whole time. And all of a sudden I'm listening to it, and like I said earlier, it's the theme, the main theme to The Mandalorian, but done this way. I was like, oh, that's really cool. But it's kind of uplifting. And Mando's like, hey, buddy, come on, wake up, man. It's, we got to go. And he gets a little choked up. Like I said, Pedro Pascal's voice work this year has been spectacular. And specifically in this episode, it really pops. You feel like he kind of get choked up, and see the child kind of wake up, and then we cut to him on the thing, and he's kind of making sure he's all good to go, and he picks him up, and you have this moment where you're like, oh my gosh, like he's gonna say goodbye. I think he might have even said like it's time for time for goodbye. I'm like getting ready to roll with tears, and walks outside with him, and him and Ahsoka have some kind of back and forth, and Ahsoka's like, well, I can't train him. And Mandalorian's like, what do you mean you can't train? We had an agreement, and I held up my end of the bargain. Damn it, I'm getting tired. He's like, I'm getting tired of people changing the deals mid-deal. When you make a deal, you finish, then you execute the deal the way it was originally put. And like, there's that tone to him where it's like, come on, how many people are gonna change shit on me? And she's like, look, there might be one other way. If you take him to this, one place and bring him to this temple, and you put him on top of the seeing stone, and he calls out to a Jedi using the Force, a Jedi might call back and come find him, and maybe that person could help with the training. But in just good conscience, knowing what happened to Anakin, and knowing that her being away for a period of time really obviously played into Anakin completely losing Anakin. And knowing that that's how the greatest Jedi of all time ended up, she doesn't want to do that to this kid. She can't do it to the kid. So she gives the Mandalorian his next clue on his mission. And thank God everybody over at the Mandalorian is smart enough to go, we need this guy with that guy at all times, man. So we're not losing our buddy cop team, so to speak. Mando and the child are still hanging out. Gideon is still out there. He did not show up this week. My wish of seeing Darksaber versus Lightsaber did not happen, although it could still be in the cards. But now that's the next thing. Mando's got to go to another spot to hopefully find more Jedi. And where that leads, who knows? But the idea that we've now put into the live action world, Thrawn, Ezra, and because of Ezra, Sabine, and this whole Ahsoka storyline, there's so much to get excited about as far as what Star Wars is going to do next. Everybody always gets all caught up into the Skywalker saga, and while the saga movies might be done, there are plenty of stories to tell, and plenty of stories that have direct impact to the Skywalker story as well, that you can tell out on this outer rim, so to speak. And this episode was fire. It was so fire. I talked for forever, man, because there's just so many good things. Dave Filoni crafts one hell of an episode here. Like, you wanted to highlight like how good of a filmmaker you are, this is the episode you show people. He just crushed it, man. I thought from tone and pacing, this episode is 40 plus minutes, so it didn't feel shortchanged at all. It was like the perfect length. Action, sets, wardrobe design, like everything that's happening in this episode is just some of the best that we've seen in the show in general. And then you add into the Ahsoka reveal and bring her into the world and getting to finally see Rosario Dawson crush it. It was just fantastic, man. I loved every bit of it. And now we know that this is no longer the child. This is Grogu. Grogu, everyone. Everyone, Grogu. I think it's going to catch on. Because it's two syllables like Yoda, Grogu. It's lining up. If you're not on board with the name, just let it grow on you. It'll get there, man. We'll get used to calling him Grogu, as I've gotten used to calling him the child instead of Baby Yoda. It's a progression with his character. But overall, man, I just love finding out stuff about his backstory, tying it into the overall universe in a way that's just, again, super cool. Anytime they start to weave some of those threads into this stuff, you're just like, gosh, man, like it can all tie in and we can keep expanding the world. And hell, I mean, last week it seemed like Favreau wants to try to fix the Star Wars universe and tell the story completely. Like, there's so many things that they can do, and I just hope that they keep allowing Favreau and Filoni to do what Favreau and Filoni want to do, because oh god, this season is crushing it, man. So there you go. Those are all my thoughts on The Mandalorian, Chapter 13, The Jedi. I am exhausted. I have talked about everything I could talk about. Hey, I'm back. I forgot two things that I wanted to point out that just I totally blanked on. One, love the androids, and the look of the androids, and the soldiers in the show. Soldiers kind of are like in almost like a full garb setup, and the mask they have has like a breathing tube thing connected to it, so they're kind of like real dope looking. And the androids too, just the way they move and the way they piece together. Some of them look like they could be built like out of multiple pieces of Android. But just the way where they are and the way they function, like that one that flips out on the roof, that stuff was really, really cool. And as far as like the writing goes and like the lines that we got in this episode, there's a moment where when Mando first gets there, he interacts with Michael Bihn's character before seeing the Magistrate, and Bihn looks at Grogu and says, "What is that thing?" And Mando just goes, "Keep him around as a good luck charm." like such a good one-liner. I really enjoyed both of those things. I thought they deserved to be in the review, so we've put them there. Now you can go back to your regularly scheduled viewing of the end of my Mandalorian Chapter 13 spoiler review. Now it is your turn. I want to know everything you're thinking about this episode. Was it everything you wanted if you are a fan of Ahsoka? Was it the type of, debut you wanted on the live-action small screen? Did Rosario do what you hoped she would be able to do with the character? Did the look, the feel, the action all feel right? What did you think about the episode as a whole? Well, how did you feel about Mando and the child kind of riding shotgun a little bit on this one, and a lot of focus going into Ahsoka? But also, how do you think that story tied in to the overall story? Was it good, bad? How did all that stuff play out for you? If you weren't familiar with Ahsoka, what was it like to watch this episode? One of the other things, like I said, I think Filoni does a really good job with is making this show accessible to, and this episode, accessible to people who might not know this character. Like I said, there's a large fan base that love Ahsoka, but there's just as many, if not more, people who have no clue who she is. So if this was your first introduction to her, how did it work? What did you pick up on? And what stuff do you want to know now? Anything you're thinking, good, bad, and different, about Chapter 13, The Jedi, down below in the comments section. Grogu and me look forward to talking to you down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with me and Grogu every single Friday when we're talking and breaking down The Mandalorian. Non-spoiler, spoiler, you want to be here for all of it. You want to be here for trailer reactions, just general movie and TV reviews, anything that has to do with the world of entertainment. This might be your place. If you like the cinema sit down and what I'm offering, and you haven't, please, I beg you, jump over there, man. Hit that subscribe button. We're so close to that 1,000 subscriber goal. I think I'm at 24 last time I checked. 24 away. So if you like what we're digging, you want to show a little love, support, make the old C-Man happy these holidays, jump over there, hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts. And until next time, for the C-Man's Cinema Sit Down, this has been Grogu. I've been the C-Man. We are signing off. Peace. Well, as I live and breathe, you still here? Check out a video like this one or this one and hit the subscribe button so you can get alerts and check out everything the C-Man's got at the Cinema Sit Down.